Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of Researching Grants, How to Read a Form 990. My name is Stephanie McGill, and I'm a Senior Manager of Development at Best Friends Animal Society. And we are starting today from the assumption that you already have a Form 990 in your hands. If you aren't sure what I'm talking about or what this is, or how to get a 990, I recommend that you take part 1, go back and listen to part 1 of Researching Grants webinar that my colleague Kelly Kramer gave last month, where she gives a lot of really great tips on the first stages of prospect research. But today we are assuming you have the 990, and why the 990 is really important is because it has so much information in it to tell you about a foundation and how to go about applying for a grant from that foundation. A lot of smaller family foundations and even large family foundations don't have websites. And so you might have found them through your searches on a foundation directory or grant station, but they don't have a website. You don't have a ton of information about them. And so the 990 is really going to be the very first and most important place you go to find their contact information, to get a snapshot of their financial history and health, and how they like to receive a grant, the instructions around that, and then, how much should you ask for and what kind of grant should you ask for? Do they support capital or operating or equipment? Now, not every 990 is going to tell you all of the things, but they are going to include a lot of basic information. So the most important thing that a 990 can show you is contact information, and there's at least 3 different places where there is contact information in the 990. The first one is on page 1 at the very top of the form. There is it lists the name of the foundation. Oftentimes it'll include a name, an address, and a phone number. And this might be, in many cases, this place, the very first sort of page 1 of the form is where I first find a phone number. The second place is on page 5, where it lists who the books, who takes care of the books. And it's important to look at the phone number from the first page and on page 5 to see if they're the same. It just tells you whether or not the person managing the books is the same listed on the first page. And the reason why that's important is because that will indicate that the trustee that receives the mail and that also manages the books is really hands-on and really involved. They also probably don't have much staff support, or they don't contract out with an accounting firm or an accountant. And so it just tells you that the folks are really engaged and wear a lot of hats. The third place to find information is on page 6, part 8. This last box here on the screenshot, that lists all the different trustees involved with that foundation. And as you can see with this foundation, the Freed Foundation based in New York City, there are 3 trustees. You have Elizabeth Freed, and she's the president. And then you have Nicholas and William. Elizabeth lives in New York, and Nicholas and William live in New Jersey, and they live in different towns in New Jersey. And this is really interesting to note. This is a really important part because it could be the case that a foundation is based in New York City, but all of the trustees might live somewhere else. Or maybe one trustee lives in New York, but another lives in Florida or Ohio or Colorado or wherever it may be. And so if you have found a foundation that isn't in your geographical area, but a trustee lives in your area, there might be some indication that they might be willing to still partner with you. And that's the trustee you might actually want to try to make contact with because they're local to you. Now, not every 990 will include different addresses. It's really up to the people involved with the foundation if they want to include their addresses. You also don't know if these are home addresses or office addresses. So you can do a quick Google search and see, does this look like a residential or a commercial area? and sometimes all of the addresses in all of these places are going to be the same. And so you aren't going to know where the trustees live, or you might just have to assume they're in the same town. But it's really important to check this, because it'll give you a really good snapshot into the geographical distribution of the folks involved. The second thing I always look for after I look at where the trustees are and if there's a phone number and if they're the same is on page 3 on part 5. There is a really handy sort of table here that shows how much money the foundation has given out over the last 5 years and how much assets they have, how many assets they have, excuse me. And so foundations are required by the IRS to distribute 5% of their assets every year. So 5% of what they have is given out to charities. And that's a really important thing to note, because it doesn't, the foundation's assets matter, but of course, if you find a foundation with 20 million assets, they're not going to be giving out that much. It's the 5% rule. And then you also want to look at, are they meeting that 5%? Are they giving out more than 5%? Are they giving out less? How stable are their assets? If you see a foundation where their assets are going up one year and then dropping and going up again, there's a little bit of vol. You don't see that too often, but that does indicate that there's some volatility, and they might not be the most reliable long-term funder. But this is just a really good snapshot to see, okay, they're giving out about $1 million a year. That's a healthy amount. And then, you know, what does that look like in more detail? We'll get into that in a second. And this is sort of as you're scrolling through the 990 on page 10. The bottom of page 10 is the next very most important place in the 990. And this is where they have information regarding contributions, grants. On this first line here, where there's that little checkbox, if that box is checked, that means that the foundation only makes contributions to pre-selected charities, and they do not accept unsolicited requests for funds. That means that they will invite you to submit an application. They do not want to receive one from you unless they have asked you to send them one. If this box is checked, again, big stop sign, do not send them an application. It's not only a waste of time, it's showing them that you don't read instructions, and some foundations can get a little upset about it. And the reasons why these boxes are checked are too varied. That's a whole other webinar session. But basically respect it, and you can still call them and tell them about yourself and say, if you're ever interested in learning more about us, I'd be more than happy to send you some information, but do not send an application. If the box is not checked, then there probably will be information in all the lines underneath it. Sometimes they might just say, go to our website or contact the foundation for more details. Sometimes it'll just be blank. If it's blank, then you definitely need to call them, because even if it's blank, they might still have some preferences. They just didn't put them in the 990. But in this instance, you can see that it gives you, they've listed the address where they want you to send applications. They detail out what they want to see in a submission. So this line B, proposal for grant must be accompanied by a grant budget, financial statements, those are your audited financial statements, or unaudited, but basically your balance sheet, and the IRS tax exempt ruling for the organization. So that's your IRS letter proving that you had your 501c3. As you've probably heard in many other grant trainings, follow the instructions. So if you are sending a grant application to this foundation and you don't include these, then you are not following the instructions. But again, it's always really important to call a foundation and confirm that these instructions are still accurate. Something I should have said at the top of this, probably, the 990 is a really good source of information, but it is a lagged source of information. Usually, it's about a year to a year and a half behind current date. So it's always important to call and confirm that what you've learned through your research is still accurate and correct and up to speed. And that's especially true around line C, any submission deadlines. They may have decided since the time that they filed the 990 that actually they do have deadlines. So as soon as you find a foundation that says that they don't have deadlines, you should call just to make sure that that's true. Line D finally lists any restrictions or limitations on awards, such as geographical areas, charitable fields, kinds of institutions, or other factors. So this foundation says that they like to see grant proposals from tax-exempt organizations that work on issues related to cancer, mental health, and animal welfare in the New York metropolitan area. But the foundation will consider grant proposals from organizations working on other issues. And that's some really interesting language. That means they're pretty broad. So they have their priority areas, cancer, mental health, animal welfare, as long as you're based in New York, the New York metropolitan area. But they're not necessarily totally closed off to any other options. And so if you weren't in cancer, mental health, or animal welfare, you might find this foundation and say, oh, well, that's interesting, and I'm going to give them a call and find out if they'd like to support my, my organization. If you are not in the New York metropolitan area, they make it pretty clear they're probably not that interested in supporting you. And that's where looking at, finally, towards the end of the document, after all, a whole bunch of other required sections at the end of every 990 is a list of every charitable organization that foundation gave grants to. And this is where you can see that geographical limitation in effect. So in the New York metropolitan area, which is not just Manhattan, but the area, they are supporting a lot of organizations, and none of these organizations are outside of that area. So, and you can see here, this is just one screenshot, but it is that they are supporting a lot of different types of animal welfare programs. So they're supporting equine, they're supporting farm, they're supporting what looks like a vet clinic, and this 990 is actually especially detailed because they list out the purpose of the grant. So retraining horses, general support, renovation of the second floor, program care of barn animals. So not every 990 will tell you this information. Sometimes it'll just say program support or general support, even if it wasn't general support. But basically, this is telling you that this foundation is interested in a whole range of things. They'll do capital, they'll fund renovation, they'll fund general support and unrestricted. They'll also fund program support. So they're really pretty open to lots of things. And you can also see the amounts really vary too. Several $10,000 grants, a $100,000 grant, $77,000. So a pretty healthy range. If you are looking at a 990 and you see that they only give out $2,500 grants, but you're looking for a $100,000 grant to support renovation, that foundation's probably not going to be a very good prospect for you because they tend to give out $2,500 grants. Conversely, if you are looking to fund a program and you need $5,000 for it, this foundation might be a good fit for you because they fund more than that. But they might be preferring to make larger grants for, fewer grants, but larger grants. So you want to make sure that your ask lines up with what you see as actual grants that they've given out. You don't want to ask for too much, and you can ask maybe sometimes for a little more, but basically you should just be lining up with what you see them giving out. Now, this is just a snapshot. There will be, in most 990s, most foundations are giving out lots of grants, and so there could be pages of these. And it's really important to look at it and see if there's a demonstration of alignment. Again, whether that's geographical, the type of program support or general operating or capital support you're looking for, and to make sure that the funding size meets your needs. And that's it. That was a really quick crash course in reading in 990. And to recap, contact information, how much money they give out every year relative to how large their assets are, instructions on applying for a grant, and what are they giving out to other groups and how does that align with what you're looking for. So thank you very much.